So hey everybody, how's this going? This is John and you're watching CineManiacs 24/7, the channel dedicated to movies, music, physical media, books, video games and pop culture. You saw the thumbnail right. Why are action movies the way they are? What's the problem with them? Why don't we have a movie like Die Hard or Rambo or The Rock or even Bad Boys when Michael Bay was actually doing sensible things? Today's video is dedicated to this very topic and I hope you'd subscribe to the channel as well because that helps me keep making more content and of course get better at my craft. So today's topic is certainly dedicated to this particular idea where I'll be speaking in detail about why action movies have become the way they have and what exactly is wrong with them and what can be done to improve them. Is it just me or have action movies actually gotten worse? Because think about this. Back in the 1980s, you could write down a character like John Rambo or the character of Bruce Willis from Die Hard. I don't remember the guy's name, but you could write them and you could still make them very, very entertaining. Sure, these characters were flawed, they had problems, they were sometimes oddly, surviving situations that they should not have survived, but yet there was something special about them. These characters resonated. These characters looked very, very humane on the screen. Even look at Terminator. Although I do get the idea that the sentiment, after the next couple of movies since T2 was not exactly what we expected, but those movies also had great action. Think of Terminator 3. It is perhaps one of the best action movies of that particular decade because they included not only special effects but also practical effects as well. And that's what made the movie, brilliant. And of course, in retrospect, after watching films like Genesis and Dark Fate, I can say why they actually like that movie more. This point would probably be something on the lines of poor editing. Look at a movie like Speed. Very, very crisply edited and very, very intense. The movie has something that I would like to call as tension. Think of this, a bus that has a bomb inside it. And you're supposed to travel only beyond 50 kilometers per hour. The moment the bus goes below 50 kilometers, boom, everybody on the bus is finished. And you have a cop and a disgruntled guy who's ordering things on a phone, watching everything through a CCTV. It's a crazy movie. Of course, the entire premise was lifted from a 1975 film called Bullet Train, which again is a very different movie, and the movie was more or less taken from that source itself. Then even Bollywood tried to remake it, but of course turned out to be very bad. But you understand the point. A movie like Speed, a movie like Heat, a movie like Ronin, or any other movie for that matter that has action, Die Hard for instance, they had something I would like to call as tight pacing and editing. Not even a single second in the movie you feel bored. Not even a single second in the movie you feel distracted. And that's what movies like this one that I mentioned, and of course movies even in the 70s, like for instance The Towering Inferno, which isn't exactly an action movie per se, but the movie still has tension. Compare on the same hand a movie like Skyscraper starring Dwayne Johnson. I don't see much tension there. That movie's entire premise has been significantly lifted from The Towering Inferno, which was a far superior movie. And trust me, Towering Inferno, even after decades of the film's release and a lot of star cast members whom I do know through other movies, they actually looked better as compared to what Skyscraper looked like. Anyway, that's the point for pacing and editing, which I believe is the reason why movies don't resonate the way they should have. Perhaps number two could definitely go to, poor character writing, the lack of credible character writing, I'd say. The reason I'm saying that is because we don't really have movies like James Bond or, even Rambo or Die Hard for that matter. You look at every James Bond era, the kind of things that they were doing are not something that woke media would like today. The movie would be shredded on social media, but yet you still had those movies being made in the 70s, 80s and the 90s as well, which is the reason why I believe that action movies are suffering, because you cannot write a character like a Brosnan Bond and not have an HR community or a character writing consulting bullshit community approve it. There's not that kind of ecosystem that exists which can approve these characters anymore. Today, half these characters will be going through a consulting team who will somehow make sure that the character is screen friendly and the box office is optimized for China, which again becomes one of the biggest reasons why these Hollywood movies that were once the pinnacle of filmmaking are not working anymore. Although I don't believe Hollywood was the filmmaking pinnacle anyway, that regard would mostly go to Italian cinema or French cinema in my understanding. But they did make good action movies, but the problem is that the writing of the characters like Rambo, or let's say Bruce Willis from Die Hard, I'm still not able to recognize the name, and also characters like the Terminator, and even other action movies, the minor action movies that might have gone unnoticed over the years but eventually became popular. Take Point Break, for instance, Johnny Utah, Keanu Reeves, and even The Matrix, one of the most landmark action sci-fi movies ever made in the history of Hollywood. They had something I'd like to call credible character writing, and that's what modern cinema misses. They don't write characters like that anymore, not without hundreds of HRs and hundreds of character writing consultants giving them approval. So that goes for point number 2, that is the lack of credible characters. We could definitely go to the idea of the lack of fresh and, very, very good ideas in action writing. Think of this: a movie like Speed, a movie like Die Hard, a movie like From Russia with Love, Tomorrow Never Dies, they all have some sort of source material. Die Hard, for instance, was taken from a 70s novel, which of course got adapted onto the screen a decade and a half later. Speed, as I mentioned, was taken from a Japanese movie. The Bond movies are basically inspired by the Bond novels written by Ian Fleming. But guess what? They were still able to think of concepts. A movie like From Russia with Love would definitely not be made today, and not with the kind of constraints that they had made the movie back in the 60s in. If you ever go and find out the documentary of how From Russia with Love was made, you will understand that action filmmaking and in general filmmaking can give you so many lessons. Look at what happened to Pedro Armendáriz. Look at what happened to how the release timeline got, shifted, and they somehow managed to complete the movie on time anyway. The editing itself is a masterclass in that film. So you understand what kind of things I'm talking about, isn't it? The lack of fresh ideas in Hollywood, the lack of fresh concepts in action filmmaking, just redundant. We don't have a train that is rushing at 200 miles an hour and a cop trying to save it. We don't exactly have a movie where a building is under fire and one odd policeman going through a divorce trying to protect it from European terrorists. No, right? We don't have movies like that anymore. The reason why those movies don't exist is because studios somehow don't seem to be investing more on creativity. Ever since DEI has taken center stage, creativity seems to have gone for a toss. Now, I'm not saying that there are not bad action directors on the male and female side, especially on the female side, because the internet likes to rag on female filmmakers a lot. And I do agree, franchises like Star Wars exist, women like Kathleen Kennedy exist, but let's be real. They didn't exactly engineer the system the way you and I think they did. It's just that the incentives changed, and they changed for the worse. And that concludes my point for the idea that the lack of good character writing and the lack of good scripts, good genuine story ideas which we can invest in, which we can believe, which is somewhat a real scenario that could happen in your daily life, they don't exist anymore. Number 4 will perhaps be one of the most controversial points I've ever made on this channel, but woke culture simply ruined films in ways you and I can never imagine. I'll tell you why this is happening. Too many of the times when DEI poked its nose into Hollywood, they changed the entire landscape in a way you and I can never imagine. Today, you cannot ever show a character who is masculine, who is competent, who somehow is good at everything he does, and strong as well, without a woman putting him in his place. Yes, there are movies like this over the decades and over the years that have been showing this exact character trope that I'm mentioning, and you might know hundreds of movies at this point from Disney and several other studios who have been doing things like this. The problem here is that this particular culture has resulted in a certain kind of people putting women at the center stage, believing that they can do things equally as good as the guys, or sometimes even better. But that's not how filmmaking is done, because when you're trying to hit check marks or boxes, creativity goes for a toss. Look at a movie like Terminator Dark Fate, a film that spectacularly bombed at the box office and put the Terminator franchise onto permanent life support. It already was under life support even back when Terminator 3 came out, but that movie's reception has drastically changed over time. And personally, even I feel that people like to rag on the movie a lot just because it did not have the tonalities of T2, and T2 anyway took the entire franchise to a different height, so understandable why people would rag on the franchise. But then a movie like Dark Fate and the treatment of John Connor in that film, atrocious. I still up to this it cannot imagine that they took 28 years to de-age Edward Furlong and Linda Hamilton, and what do? They waste Edward Furlong with a bloody bullet. One bloody bullet and the guy is dead. And that entire movie got ragged on for this very reason. Anything that happens in that movie post this particular sequence where John Connor is bumped off by the Terminator, inconsequential, because half of what that movie was showing was already present in T2. And there are parts and bits of the movie where I felt that they were just trying to copy T2 tone by tone and line by line. And even though they got James Cameron onto the producer's seat, the film still bombed. So you understand what I'm talking about. When you try to gender swap or race swap characters just for the sake of fitting in and showing a certain kind of audience that you care about their nationality, filmmaking, creativity, and in general writing go for a toss. And that's no surprise that Hollywood has been yapping out crap in the name of big franchises that were once juggernauts in Hollywood. Star Wars is a blatant example of what I'm talking about. Although sometimes I do believe that the reactions on the internet are not representative of what people might have felt about the film, but I get the sentiment. I get the idea that you just cannot replace legacy characters with half-hearted explanations and woke writing. That's where the entire franchise has gone for a toss. And now I don't think, Star Wars is ever going to recover in the cultural point of view, at least. Or any of the franchises that have been around for so long and have been ruined by this very problem of identity politics and gender swapping characters just to make them look relevant. This summarizes my entire idea about why I feel action movies have not been working well. The editing and the pacing are not good. The character writing is flawed. There are no new stories, and woke culture is probably ruining a lot of things than you and I can ever imagine. Now, what are the solutions to this? Hollywood is not going to listen. Let's be very real about this thing, because if they did, they will have to admit that what they did to franchises like Star Wars, or what they did to franchises like Terminator, or even other franchises was horribly wrong. They did not gauge the interest of the customer or the person who was going to watch their movie. They talked down to the fans. Of course, one of the most blatant examples of what happened with the Star Wars community is when the studio started talking down to the fans, which of course is horrendous in all my experience as a film guy who has been watching films since childhood. But there is a solution to this. If we only start looking at movies from a different industry, perhaps, if we try and understand what exactly are other industries doing, maybe this is something good. I refuse to believe that an entire film industry across the world has lost their jewels when they talk about filmmaking. Not really. There are good movies in other parts of the world, or even in Hollywood for that matter. Just that you need to pick the right kind of gem from the coal mine. Well, that's it for today's video, guys. Thank you so much for watching it up until this point. If you have, please subscribe to my channel and keep buying physical media. Like I tell you, that's the best and the most amazing way to watch movies for long. Stay safe, bye bye, and Godspeed.